Hello and welcome to the last lecture of the course. This will be a lecture about Verdi's Otello Act IV. I just want to preface it by saying I had hoped for more feedback from you in the last couple of weeks as you prepare for the final exam and the final paper. And I just want to be sure you understand that the deadline of the final paper is firm. That's Monday, May 11th. And you have to contact me by the end of this week such that we can set a time for your self-scheduled final exam, which must be taken a week from today, on Tuesday. And that would be Tuesday, just to get the date correct, Tuesday, May 5th. And if you don't do that, if you don't let me know, and if we don't schedule that successfully, it will be the same as you not showing up for the exam, in which case you tie my hands and you fail the course. You fail the exam and you won't do well in the course, obviously. So please help me to be sure that doesn't happen, okay? And now to go on for the last lecture of the course, and on a really high point, what I'm going to have you do after this lecture is watch the fourth act of Verdi's Otello. What I want to talk to you in this lecture about mainly is it consists basically of Desdemona singing a willow song, and that's exactly what we saw in the Rossini opera. Verdi and his librettist are basically copying the Rossini version of Otello as a model. And you'll see Desdemona, she sings a willow song. Her confidant is there. In this case, her name is Emilia. And so she's singing the song to Emilia and speaking back and forth with Emilia as she prepares to go to bed. And then after that long scene, Otello comes in and murders her. And that's the climax of the opera, obviously. And many things in this scene are right from Rossini. She sort of goes back and forth singing the song, but talking to Emilia. There's an interruption where she hears something and Emilia says, "Oh, it's only the wind." You'll remember back in the Rossini version, that was a storm. She said, "Oh, there's a storm outside." And then she also sings a song again called the Willow Song. She's very pensive this night. She really has a presentiment that Otello is going to murder her. And so what comes into her mind is this Willow Song, which she knew from the past, and she sings for Emilia. Just like in the Rossini, she'll sing a verse, then stop, sing a verse, then stop. Everything I'm going to, as I refer to what happens in that scene now in the Verdi version, I'll be referring to the link below to the entire opera with the English subtitles, which you should already have looked at by now. And I'll point out to you just now that Act 4, where I want you to begin after this lecture, begins at 1 hour, 43 minutes, and 15 seconds. 1 hour, 43 minutes, and 15 seconds. And as I talk now, when I want to refer to a section of what happens in this scene of Desdemona's, I'll refer to the English subtitle, the translation, which will be easy to follow. Be sure you have your subtitles turned on. When the act begins, there's a long orchestral introduction. And as you watch, notice the instruments that are giving these sounds. It's very beautiful, very somber, full of foreboding. And primarily, Verdi makes use of the woodwinds to give a really special, an especially sad quality as this act begins. As I say, the orchestral introduction is kind of long. And then what happens? There is the talk between Desdemona and Emilia, her confidant maid, whatever you want to call her. And then there is Desdemona singing the verses of the Willow Song, which is this emotional song, which obviously means a lot to her at this moment, because it's about a woman who dies for love, basically. And it's similar to her own situation in the drama. What's happening here, though, is it's even harder. Remember with the Rossini, I gave you the assignment of separating out where is the accompanied recitative and where are the sections of aria, which is to say the Willow Song that Desdemona is singing. And you'll remember it was a little bit unclear. It wasn't the easiest assignment, but you basically all did well with it. And in the end, it was fairly obvious where the divisions were. But here, as we talked about with Act 2 of La Traviata by Verdi, and as we talked about with Act 1 of Otello by Verdi, Act 1 of this same opera, Verdi is very much moving towards a continuous musical dramatic texture in which divisions between recitative and aria are not clear and they blend. And there's no clear stopping and starting point. It's a different kind of drama, and it's a different kind of opera, and a different kind of operatic texture. He's very much trying to erase those divisions, those clear lines. What this does, well, first of all, I'd like to point out that had we had a regular course, we would have looked at the work of a German opera composer which influenced Verdi to some degree. This is the great German composer of opera named Wagner, Richard Wagner. Basically lives exactly the same length of time as Verdi in the same years. And Wagner very much wanted to abolish conventional opera where you had a sort of a meaningless recitative that the singers went through really quickly just to arrive at the opera and stand and sing. I'm sorry, to arrive at the aria and stand and sing. And when I say aria, it could be a duet or a trio or a chorus, but basically something song-like. And Wagner theorized, he wrote a lot of theory about why that should happen, because it will make the drama more meaningful, and opera can do really what the ancient Greek drama did. That was one of Wagner's main concerns. Verdi never writes theory about this, but over the course of his career, he moves towards this and really reaches his peak in Otello. And so you'll see as you listen to Act 4, it's just a continuous music drama. There's no clear division into aria and recitative. Some songs are more aria, some sections are more aria-like, they're more song-like, which is my favorite phrase for aria, but the divisions are not clear. And I'd like to point out that, a lot of this has to do with the discourse when people talk about drama in general, of the unities. You probably have heard of this, that Aristotle in his Poetics talked about the fact that in drama, the unities should be observed when a drama is written. And what did he mean by that? He talked about unities of time, place, and action. And I imagine you've run into this in high school or somewhere before. In other words, the time unfolds naturally. You don't have an act where in scene 1 something is happening between the characters, and in scene 2, when you get to scene 2, 20 years have passed. It says in the program 20 years later. If you have unity of time, that doesn't happen. And the same with unity of place. You don't jump from a scene in a dungeon to a scene in the countryside by a lake to a scene inside a castle. That doesn't happen if you're observing the unity of place. And what this all leads to is a unity of action, which basically means that the drama unfolds in a natural way. It's more realistic. It's more realistic. In earlier Verdi operas, the unities are not observed. In general, in opera in the early 19th century, they're not observed. And that's pretty much a hallmark of the Romantic period. Earlier in centuries past, in what they call the neoclassical approach to drama, dramatists observed the unities, and it was very important to do that. Shakespeare, on the other hand, did not. So you've always got these two different approaches to drama. And again, in the early 19th century opera, the Donizetti that we looked at, for example, the unities it's sort of a hallmark of the Romantic period that the unities aren't important. But now we've moved into a late Romantic period where Verdi, at least in Otello, very much wants to present you with an opera that observes the unities. Okay, and now to turn to, after that long orchestral introduction of Act 4, you'll see that Desdemona sings the Willow Song really in 4 sections. And I'm going to point out how she goes back and forth between accompanied recitative with Emilia and the sections actually that are more song-like of the Willow Song. And the actual Willow Song comes in 4 sections, but the third of which is just very short. It's really only one line from the Willow Song that she's singing. So you'll hear just before when she sings the the first line in English translation of the Willow song that Desdemona will sing after some back and forth with Emilia, and after a woodwind introduction, a very beautiful phrases in the woodwinds. The English translation of the first part of the Willow song is, "She wept as she sang on the lonely heath." This is Desdemona talking about the character in the song. She wept as she sang on the lonely heath. And that section ends with Desdemona repeating, singing the word salce, or willow, 3 times. It's very clear. Then an interesting thing happens. It goes to a very short bit of recitative where Desdemona looks at Emilia and says, "Hurry, help me. I have to get ready for bed because Otello is coming." But interestingly, that's introduced by the same woodwind melodies that introduced the section of the Willow song. And this again is a way for Verdi to sort of blend the lines between the sections that are recitative and the sections that are song-like. You remember in the Rossini, every time the Willow song came back, there was a clear signal in the orchestra. But here that signal is being used sometimes to signal Willow song and sometimes to signal accompanied recitative between Desdemona and Emilia. The second bit of Willow song begins with the English line, "The fresh streams ran," and you'll remember that imagery, same imagery of streams from the Rossini version. "The fresh streams ran between the flowery banks." Then comes the third section, is that short snippet from the Willow song. Desdemona sings, "He was born for glory and I to love." Then there's some more recitative where she takes off her ring and gives it to Emilia as she's getting undressed. And that's where the interruption comes. Desdemona suddenly says, "Oh, wait, I hear a noise." And Emilia says, "Oh, it's the wind," just like we saw in the Rossini. And then finally comes the last section of Willow song. And that begins with the English words, I to love him and to die, which means that the character in the song is in love with this man who isn't faithful, and so she dies. And it ends again with that repetition 3 times of the word for willow, salce. So that's where the Willow song ends, and you'll follow this. It's very clear. But what isn't clear, and basically what I want you to notice, is it's hard to distinguish where you have the song-like, aria-like sections of the Willow song and where you have this back and forth conversation in accompanied recitative between Desdemona and Emilia. And that's what I want you to get. I don't want you to worry too much about which is which, but just feel how the texture of this is continuous and how the drama unfolds very realistically. Okay, what this means is realism. And then at this point, you'll just notice then what happens lastly is there's a very big outburst, emotional outburst from Desdemona when she says simply the word addio, goodbye, to Emilia, because Desdemona knows she's going to die. She knows what's going to happen. So she dismisses Emilia, but gives her this very loud addio, an emotional outburst. Then things quiet down, and something now happens, though, that does not exist in Rossini and does not exist in Shakespeare either. We've had the scene with Desdemona singing the Willow song to Emilia. Emilia leaves, and then now the act has to go to the final part, which is where Otello comes in and kills Desdemona, realizes then that he was wrong, she wasn't unfaithful, and then he kills himself. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. But here, what Verdi and his librettists do is they introduce a sort of a buffer between those two parts of the act. And the buffer is a prayer for Desdemona. And what Desdemona does is she sings her own version of a very, very common Catholic prayer called the Ave Maria or Hail Mary, which I imagine you've heard of, even if you sort of aren't able to recite it. It's part of, Roman Catholics know it by heart, of course. And it really does some amazing things. On the one hand, first of all, it's extraordinarily beautiful. It's just as beautiful as any music ever written. And when she sings it, the words aren't the actual text of the Hail Mary. They start out that way. But then the librettist and Verdi sort of individualize the prayer and make it appropriate to Desdemona's situation. And as you watch it, you'll see how that happens when you read the subtitles and listen. But you should take a moment after you're done watching. I put the link below to compare what she sings in her Ave Maria, her Hail Mary, to the standard prayer. So I've linked to the article in Wikipedia about the standard Hail Mary, and it'll give you some sense of the inventiveness of this personalized Ave Maria that Verdi and his librettist invent for Desdemona. And the other thing I want to point out is remember that this opera premiered in, if I'm not wrong, 1887, to a primarily Catholic audience in Milan at La Scala, and everybody in the audience would have known the Ave Maria by heart. It's a prayer that they all grew up reciting. It's like second nature to them. So to put that on stage, again, it makes for this extraordinarily realistic moment. The audience watches Desdemona alone begin to sing this prayer. Now, normally, if a character is alone on stage in an opera and starts to sing, there's not much that's realistic about it. Who does that? Nobody. Nobody, when they're alone, stops and expresses their feelings in song. Not often, anyway. But here, it's like the audience is eavesdropping on Desdemona doing something that they all probably do every night, which is to recite this prayer. And if not every night, very often. And so that adds an intimacy, and it draws the audience in a really spectacular way. And then, as you'll see, once you go through the Willow Song and the Ave Maria and you get to Otello's entrance and the murder, I'll leave that to you to watch the entire act now. But the impact dramatically is extraordinary. Thank you.